either welcome or welcome back to now the second talk of today of the Digital Symposium. Today we are speaking with Professor Tim Lang from the City University London about a topic that I am very passionate about, which is food policy and resilient food systems, something that also the recent pandemic has made an even more important topic to talk about and to discuss. So I'm very excited about hearing what Tim Lang has to talk about and say about this. I want to take a minute to also introduce our speaker today. I already said it's Professor Tim Lang. He is a professor at the City University London and was also the leader or chair of the Center for Food Policy of the university. He is the author of several books. For example, one is called Food Policy or Food Wars. And whether you are dealing with sustainable food systems or public health or food sovereignty, food activism, Tim Lang is a name and a person that you will come across whenever you're dealing with these topics. So I'm very, very excited and honored to be moderating this talk today. I am Dina Hoffmann. I am working for Speiseräume, which is a consultancy agency on sustainable food systems and food policy, currently working on the project Kantine Zukunft. But without further ado, I want to leave the stage to our today's speaker, Professor Tim Lang, and welcome.
Hello. Is that working, Dina? Can you raise your hand? Is it okay? Yeah, it's okay. Okay, I'm going to. Hello, everybody. I'm going to. I have some slides. Which are yours. You can get them afterwards from Dina or die Gemeinschaft. Who asked me to speak about this? The title I was given was this. You used the word sustainability. One of the things I want to raise for you is that sustainability means everything to everyone. Who can be against sustainability? I want to go into a bit of the differences, the tensions about sustainability, but I want to also argue that the crisis of food, the environment, food, health, food and society, food and the political economy is so great. We cannot have academic discussions. We have to do what you people are doing. Get on with it, as we say in English. So my talk, I'm going to go through some of my reflections on where I think we are. And sometimes this first heading I have here in my talk, I think I have 5 headings. And this is very important for me and for us. It's very easy to drown in the complexity. Food is good for the climate. Is that good for the health? Is that good for jobs? Is that good for biodiversity? Is it good for the rich world as opposed to the poor world? Very easily, food movements, radical critics can end up arguing 3 people in a room over a beer instead of joining up as bits of a bigger picture. You might be working on plastics and food, and you think this is the most important thing in civilization. Someone else is working on food and poverty in the developing world, thinks it's the most important issue. Someone else thinks climate change is the most important. The truth is, they're all important. And I have spent many years trying to think about how do we put it together. So I'm someone who thinks we have to, as I say here, don't drown in the complexity, get defeated by complexity. And the issue is, can we simplify complexity, but allow that complexity? And I think the answer is yes. And this in one slide is my answer. We did this. I was a government commissioner in the British government on sustainable development, and I was the food commissioner for the country. This is a prime minister's appointment. And we worked for 5 years on, this was the ending, and then there was a change of government in 2010, and the commission was abolished in 2011. And just when we had put this picture together of saying, here is a way of integrating complexity to get, as I put in the middle, sustainable diets from sustainable food systems, the new Conservative government came in and said, we don't want to know. So Britain has done no thinking at all for 10 years. And now in the crisis, COVID-19 and Brexit, suddenly they're realizing they've got to think about food again. Well, what a surprise. This is the mad British. But in one slide, here is my answer to the complexity. We can do it under 6 major headings. You can look at this later. I think if you have, as in my working life, I've had to brief ministers or big businessmen or talk to radical community activists. And I say, look, in 30 seconds, I will tell you how we need to group it together. You need to think about health, social values, quality of food, environment, governance, how we make decisions, the politics and the economics of it. And under that, you can fit everything that we all work on. This combines everything. No one, I've shown this for 9 years, and no one has said, but I think something here is very important is missing. This is my attempt. I'm not saying it's the answer. But I think you in Germany need to, the work you're doing, you need to work out where you are under this. You're maybe working on quality and social values and environment, but are you working on governance and equality and health in the same way? Other people will be doing that. The very active movement you have in Germany of sustainable food cities and all the work that you people are involved in on this call, fits into this. You need to have some working model in Germany. Across Europe, the IPES food has been working in this sort of way, trying to put bodies of knowledge and data together. You end up with something like this. But why do we need this? Why do we need some thinking like that to address the problem of complexity? Is because the food system is in trouble. Whether we look at ecosystems, the food economy, food culture, or society, there are problems. That's just taking 3 of the headings of my 6. The ecosystems, climate change, water, food's the biggest user of water on the planet, the biggest destroyer of biodiversity, soil on which we depend, the seas on which we depend are being damaged by food. The economy, consumers, even good organic food consuming German consumers are actually not paying the full cost of the damage in your country, my country, over the last 200 years of intensification. We are all moving. In Germany, you have a great tradition of thinking about food and purity. The pure food movement begins in Germany and in Britain in the 19th century. And in Germany and indeed in Britain, it went very right-wing. Hitler was a vegetarian, as you know. The fascists in Britain were the first organic movement were mostly very right-wing. We have very interesting histories that we need to bring out and discuss if we're thinking about the food economy. But right now, the 3rd bullet point is really important. Even in good food Germany or good food Britain, there is a rise of consuming what we call ultra-processed foods. Foods which are high in fat, salt, and sugar, which are giving the non-communicable diseases, which look like food, but are basically being made in a factory from mass commodities, taken from anywhere in the world. We call that ultra-processing. Culture is in fantasy land, even in good, solid, ecological Germany or Britain. There is a fantasy that we can eat whatever we like. We eat a Mediterranean diet, which they don't even eat in the Mediterranean now. We can eat, as I say, ad libitum, what we like, when we like, getting food wherever we like, because we're rich. And actually, culture is destroyed and distorted by huge amounts of money on advertising food. There is little public education and a lot of marketing. And the work that community groups do and that educators like me do, we are small compared to the billions of dollars, euros, pounds, whatever, pesetas that are spent. I always give one example. Coca-Cola, the biggest food and drink company in the world, spent 2 times more on its advertising and marketing than the World Health Organization has for 2 years. It's just, that's one company. Society is very divided. My country, the gap between rich and poor is widening in life expectancy, in how people eat, what they do, and that's true all over Europe. If we don't take the society values seriously when we're worried about environment, we are missing where we get opposition. This is a long story. We, in the last 200 years, again, in Germany and Britain, our 2 countries, historically, we have killed each other for 500 years. For 70 years, we have been in more peace. And now my country is behaving very stupidly. But actually, in food, the problem of disruption is 10,000 years. We have 10,000 years of disruption, from settled agriculture to the chemical and industrial revolutions of the 18th and 19th century. And in the 19th century is when in Germany, in Gießen, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, the beginnings of the chemical application of the chemical revolution, the fertilizers, and in my country, the same. We began an intensification of what became an industrialization of food. And then the Mendelian genetics and the oil era, and then the green revolution and so on, the nutrition transition, where as people get richer, they start eating like rich people, and then they eat ultra-processed foods. And we get the livestock revolution of the last 40 years, where a country like India, which is a vegetarian society mainly, now has the biggest cattle population on the planet, and where the Amazon is being destroyed to produce soya, to feed pigs in China, in Britain, in Europe, and so on. This is this endless disruption. And in the right-hand, bottom right-hand of this slide, I say, I think we are now seeing an emerging fight. I am 72 years old, you are younger than me. That's why I like to talk with people like you, and I teach. This is the problem that we face. An ecological fight with a biotechnology fight, with big data, with robotics, which wants to get rid of people from the land, automating chefs, not just people on the land. We have many fights, many attempts to disrupt. I just put 4 there. We tend to use the language of food security, that next year, the UN system, I'm an advisor to it, is operating, and I think you should be involved through your government, the UN Food Systems Conference is happening at the end of next year. It'll probably be virtual. And this notion of food security is a big sort of totem pole. We must be very clear what we mean by food security. Is it food nationalism? Is it food self-sufficiency? Is it food defense? Is it food control? Is it food resilience? This very interesting word in English, borrowed from the engineers and the ecologists, a system being able to bounce back from a shock. My country is in shock. It's been fed by the European Union in COVID-19, and it's in a fantasy. But what would happen if the border went up in Dover? What would happen? or 40% of food stops coming to Britain. What is Britain's resilience? Not very good. But what is it ecologically? Not very good. So I have been doing with my country, using this to try and audit what my country is doing. Food capacity is an interesting idea. In Germany, you have a much more decentralized system of governance than Britain. Britain is a very centralized country. And we have also the notion of food sovereignty, which basically came from the developing world, the peasants' movement. And it's used now in Europe, but not with the same meaning. We don't have small farmers in the sense that there are 1 billion farmers on the world, of whom half are unwaged, hand to mouth. But these are very different political notions for the future and what we mean by sustainability and food security. And I see the 2020s as a return to some very old themes in policy. In my work, I have more and more said, we are where we are now, and what we do in academia is try to look at the data of what is going on, but more and more I see some of the big themes of 200 years ago coming back. What is land for? What is labor? What is food as labor? What is food as culture? What is the role of the state as opposed to the citizen, as opposed to commerce? Who has responsibility for society and health? If there are class divisions, income divisions, does that matter to me or you? Yes, it shows up in health, shows up in life expectancy. But food always, this bottom line, is where the biosphere, the humans, and the economy meet. And that's what we've got wrong. The European Union has been bad on it. And yet the European Union came into existence, the common market, in 1956, 57, the Treaty of Rome, and then the Strasbourg Conference, to try and address agriculture. And the argument was, if only we just produce more food, everything will be okay. It's not. If we just produce more food, we have more waste. How we produce the food, what sort of food? Is it more animals or more plants? These are very big questions that were asked more in the 19th century in Germany and Britain than they are now, but they have now come back. The problem number two is that we cannot ignore the evidence. You have President Trump, you have some politicians in Germany and Britain who are in fantasy land. They don't believe in climate change. They think problems of heart disease aren't real. Anyone can eat what they like. This is a fiction, but actually the data is too solid. I spent 3 years on this. I was a commissioner on the EAT-Lancet Commission, the medical journal The Lancet, founded in the 1830s in my country, a very famous medical journal. It creates what it calls Lancet commissions. It takes 12 people like me or 18, puts them in a room and says, come up with the solution to this problem. Well, this took us 3 years and 35 people. The question we were asked was, can we feed the world by 2050 healthily without destroying the environment? The answer was yes, but only if we eat a diet which is very good for health and has less meat, less dairy than Germans eat or Britons eat, and much less than Americans eat. And it's because of this. If you look at this in one slide, you can see along the bottom some of the environmental impacts of food, greenhouse gas, land use, how much food per square meter of land use, energy use, and so on, acidification and eutrophication. And then you look at the different foods. We have much more data than this, but in one slide, it's a very good one. You can see that basically the more you go up to the top of meats, pork, chicken, fish, the more you get a big environmental impact. That doesn't mean to say stop eating ruminant meat or pork or chicken or fish or dairy. Germans like dairy. I like cheese. I was a dairy farmer at one point. It's how much, how often. Do we have as many cows as Germans in Germany? Do we want to intensify? Do we produce and feed wheat and cereals to the cows, or do we feed them grass? In which case you have fewer cows. These are very fundamental questions that shape health. We know a more plant-based diet is better for public health, but you have to eat differently. These are very big questions. And here, if we look globally, this is looking at 3 levels of income of countries. In blue on the left, lower middle income countries, upper middle income countries, so China, India, high income on the right in yellow, that's us, Germany, Britain, America. What you see is we're looking at what sort of food are people eating. As people get richer, they start consuming more processed food, red. They start producing more, drinking more soft drinks, the green, Coca-Cola. Huge amounts when it gets to us. And they eat more ultra-processed foods, the light blue color. My country is the worst consumer. We consume in Britain the most ultra-processed foods of any European country. 51% of the British diet is high in salt, fat, and sugar. It's food in a packet, made in a factory. The environmental impact is terrible. But if we go back to the meat issue, there are 2 sources of data here. On the left, a very good study by Joe Poor in Britain and Nemeczek in Switzerland. It's a very simple, this is the BBC's graph from it. Basically, food accounts for about 1/4 of all greenhouse gases. Animal products account for 58% of that, and beef and lamb account for 50% of that. So we cannot ignore the beef and lamb and dairy problem. And on the right, a very elegant study by Ripple and colleagues, just showing you the greenhouse gas emissions of beef, sheep, beef grown in meadows, so beef fed with cereals, bought in foods, has a much higher greenhouse gas emissions than beef on grass-fed, but even beef on grass-fed is high, and the animals take longer to develop, so you actually get more over the lifestyle of an animal, you get very high. But then it drops. When you come down to the right-hand side, if you have a meat substitute, why eat a meat substitute? But if you want to eat a vegan burger and think you're eating a beef burger, well, its greenhouse gas emissions are a lot less. Or pulses and peas and things are much less. We know, this is from the famous planetary boundaries studies, we know that we humans are exceeding what we can do. We're destroying the atmosphere, oceans, potash and nitrogen, fresh water, land use, biodiversity. A safe operating would be to keep within the green space at the middle. You can see top left, the biosphere integrity. These are biodiversity losses. It's out of control. The nitrogen and potassium, the cycles are being broken. The seas are getting to a dangerous level of acidification, but they're not totally dangerous. So this is not good. I'm British. I've spent the last 2 years reviewing my country. My country has 18 million hectares of land. We can grow things on about 6 million, so 1/3 of that land. We actually only use 165,000 hectares for horticulture. So the good thing for health, we are using almost none of Britain to grow. We are using the Netherlands and Spain. We are imperialists when we have beautiful land which used to grow horticulture. And you in Germany are doing the same thing. And the Netherlands is at risk as a country from climate change, and we in the north of Europe need to take that very seriously. So for my country, I'm saying we should be expanding our horticulture, lifting it above the area. I'm here speaking on an island. I'm 1 meter above the sea here, outside my window here, 1 meter above the sea. We should be preparing land to be growing plants and vegetables and fruit for when and if climate change is out of control. And we need to diversify, and we need to grow more woods. You in Germany are very good on wooding. In Britain, very bad. But one good thing my crazy government is doing is committing to more woods. So what have we got to do? Well, I'm now going to give you some options. We could just say, be a good German consumer and look at the label, use the labels and only choose organic. But the evidence that labels work, change opinions, is not good. The evidence is good that if you pour a lot of money into advertising, you can shape behavior. But no budget, no government is going to spend Coca-Cola budget to say eat a sustainable diet. But you who work with chefs, I too work with chefs, we have to change the culture in different ways. We don't have their budget of Coca-Cola or Nestle or Unilever even. We've got to do it not just by appealing to the reason of consumers through labels. We haven't got time. We've got to move faster. Although labels are useful, the good thing about arguing for a label is you get the company to think about what its ingredients are, and it has to declare it. Consumers don't use labels very much, but it took us 20 years to get nutrition labeling in the European Union. 20 years of my life went into that. It was good because it's there. If someone has a heart attack or baby, they look at the label. And then if they survive the heart attack, they stop looking after 1 year. And when the baby grows up, they stop looking. So appealing to rational consumers makes a lot of intellectual sense, but except it doesn't work in time. You could say leave it to industry. Only industry has the power. Let industry change things beneath the consumer. So it's what we call choice editing. So that Coca-Cola can reduce the 11 lumps of sugar in a bottle of Coca-Cola to only 5 by putting NutraSweet in. The problem with that is it sounds good. Coca-Cola says, look, we're being good for the consumer. Actually, they keep the soft drink tasting sweet. So we think sweet food is nice. If you gradually reduce sugar from all of your diet, you then, when you drink a Coca-Cola, you think, yuck, that's so sweet. You don't like it. You have to learn to like things sweet. You have to learn to not like things sweet. So leaving it to industry, sometimes that's good if you get all of industry at the same time. That can be good. There's an interesting work going with industry on waste. The circular economy thinking is very good, getting people to recycle their waste. In Europe, we waste huge amounts of food. Food is biological, not just physical. So industry is important, but I'm not sure we can leave it to industry. We can say, well, the answer is lab-based meat instead of cows. There is on the left is the picture of the most expensive burger ever made, the first artificial cloned meat. There is a lot of huge investment in high technology in meat and in farming. At the bottom right, very interesting, robotics, getting rid of labor. That means the land becomes even more industrialized. A new industrial revolution occurs, getting rid of humans altogether. It breaks even more the relationship between the town and the countryside. These are being invested in at the moment in a very big way, but they are partly, I think, a cultural issue. not just a technology issue. So I think we have to watch this very carefully. We can just wait for crisis, in which case we're doing that very well. This is actually what's going on. Floods, climate change, droughts, pandemics. This is the COVID-19 virus. Actually, the evidence for crisis, getting people to change food, is very good indeed. War is a very good motivator for changing food. After the Second World War, big changes. The European Union is founded. The UN, the ILO, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, all of these began as a reaction to the Second World War. We have to do things better. Except crisis is a very bad thing to wait for. It's the evidence, as I always say, is very good. Have a crisis if you want to change the food system. The problem is the damage is enormous. And my argument, and my colleagues' argument, is that we are in a crisis. We have the climate change, the water, the biodiversity, the inequalities, the heart disease, the non-communicable diseases, and now the COVID-19 crisis. We have a food crisis. So for die Gemeinschaft, this is a very good opportunity for you to be piecing the crisis together. And we have to do it, I think, in this way. We have to reframe choice. On the right is a very interesting model from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, a British organization, but it doesn't matter that, and have a look at this later. If you start at the bottom, you do nothing. Well, there's a problem, well, do nothing. The next step up, governments say, well, put it on a label. Then they say, enable choice, and you gradually climb up the ladder. And actually, the one that's the most important, as I put in red, is change the law. If you want sustainable diets from sustainable food systems, the law has to change. The finance system has to change. There has to be an agreement within society. We were doing this from the 1950s to 2010, and now we're going to do this. That's what's going on in the European Union at the moment with the green framework, with the farm to fork, with a food 2030. This is changing the framework of policy. I think this is excellent. My country has chosen to go somewhere else. It's crazy. But we will have to do something similar in Britain. They're beginning to realize, even the crazy British government is beginning to realize it has to do something about the food system, because actually it gets 45% of its food from across the channel. But the goal, the evidence says, what we need to do is my very first slide, my second. We've got to reframe the food system around sustainable diets from sustainable food systems. What's stopping this? I think it's politics, it's wealth, and it's modernity. In the EAT-Lancet Commission, we concluded, I was the policy lead on this, so the last fifth of that report, if you've not read it, read it, please. We called it nothing but a great food transformation has got to happen in the next 20 years, worldwide. There's no point Germany doing it on its own, or Britain doing it on its own. It has to be all of us. You can look at that. It has to be at a major scale. My argument, and this is now the last slide. If we do not act, crisis will force us to act. I think some crises are beginning to get some change. But so far, even when we have positive change, it's too slow. Discussions like you're having, the work that you are doing is wonderful. I just want to say it makes me very happy that a group like you works and exists. In my country, we have excellent groups. If you're not in touch with Sustain, it's an umbrella, you are good. I helped found that 35 years ago. and I was chair of it. It's just wonderful. But all of this is excellent, great people doing great things, but not enough. We all know it's not enough. And that means us turning sideways and looking into our countries. I think we rich countries are the problem. We spend a lot of time looking at the poor countries. We need to look at ourselves and get a grip of ourselves. But we're not going to do that if environmental people don't talk to public health people, if socially interested campaigns and movements don't talk with the seriousness of politics and the economy. And you work with chefs, me too, unless we take the issue of quality of food. You can talk about cars, mobility, but quality is the issue which is so fundamental to food culture. That, it seems to me, we need to do more work on that. And I speak as I originally was a psychologist. I'm really interested in the mass psychology of food. This is something we have to be more clear about. And for me, this is my last line on this slide, is what in academic work we call a multi-criteria approach. There's no one criterion for judging good food, that we have to have multiple criteria. And that's why, well, I go back to my beginning, that's why I do that. You must have something that brings people together, that brings artists and cultural change agents to work on food for social values alongside environmentalists, alongside people working on politics. The German federal system as opposed to the state system and the system of mayors and local governments, it's a problem of what we call multi-level governance. We have Europe, the European Union, the federal German, then the states, then the local areas. Your movement must be engaged with all those levels, or it's not addressing the realities. That makes life complex for us. And that was my starting point. And life is complex. But I think now we know enough. We know enough to begin to move and work very hard and very fast. That's my last slide. The EAT-Lancet report is there. It's free. You can download it and free. My book, Sustainable Diets, on the right there, has a lot on this, written with an ex-student of mine, a nutritionist. And my most recent book that came out the week of COVID-19, where I wrote about my country. And you see the front cover, you know, the boats and the planes going into Britain. It's a mess, but somehow we have to make something good. We could do the same at the European level. So if you want to look at more of my thinking and how I've tried to develop my thinking on this, look at those. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. I hope that was of some interest. Let me now go mute, stop sharing.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting for sure. Thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time and joining us today. I think we all got a lot of input, a lot of food for thought, and your talk was probably the best base for having a discussion on resilient and sustainable food systems now and food policy. And I saw that a lot of the participants have already discovered the chat box. I want to say again, feel free to introduce yourself there, but also pose your questions that you came up with during the talk. Again, we encourage everyone to ask your questions personally. Just turn on your video and your microphone to do that. Otherwise, of course, we're also more than happy to read them out loud for you. We have one question from Mitch Seguin. Mitch, if you want to ask your question personally, please turn on your microphone now.
Yeah, I think I just turned it on. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, loud and clear.
Okay. So thanks a lot for that, Tim. One of the pieces that was sticking out to me in the last couple of slides, and I'm curious to get your opinion on it, is I think consumers making different choices is the direction we need to go to have like a large impact, I feel. And I think you were saying something along that line. And I'm kind of curious what your perspective is on the work that's happening. There's a lot more restaurants and small grocers and people like this who are putting in a lot more effort in trying to tell the story of food and where it comes from and how it's made. And I know for me personally, that's changed a lot of my choices. And I'm just kind of curious if you've seen or studied anything that kind of shows that as people become more educated about where their food comes from, they automatically start making better choices. So the education part is really a key portion.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mitch. I agree completely. I'm a great fan of the Chefs Manifesto group of restaurateurs and chefs. For all sorts of reasons, in our centre for food policy in London, where we've had many German international students, we have had a long interest in the catering industry and the role of cooking and how cooking has become industrialized, but also made elite people watch more TV of chefs than they cook themselves. And I think the story of food is very important. It grabs people's attentions. And I personally, I know chefs as friends, and I have helped many very famous chefs in Britain, and who agree with you. The story is actually culture. For me, for my 6 headings, social values, that's the culture bit. And food is culture. Everyone thinks, everywhere in the world, everyone says their food is the best, their food is the nicest, their food is the most perfect, and everyone else's is bad, but theirs is perfect. We have to have new stories and new narratives of explaining the complexity, explaining what's wrong, and also helping change agents. And cooking and taste is one of the biggest change agents. I'm a great fan of the work that the Harvard School of Public Health has done with the Culinary Institute of America, the other CIA. I know Greg Drescher, that the head of that for many years, from when he used to work at the Old Ways Trust. And I think they've done very clever work with even big chains of hotels and restaurants in America, in the States, showing that you can improve the taste, improve the quality, and dramatically improve the nutrition profile, but also the environmental footprint. But then tell the positive story of it. I think we're beginning to do that work. I paused then because I still think that area of work needs to be so much faster. We're barely beginning. It's seen as elite. It's seen as specialist. We have to get it into the mass food. And that's, unfortunately, the evidence says that happens in crisis. So I agree with you, but I wanted to go faster. I want I always, when I meet the Chefs Manifesto people, I say, 600 is terrific, but why can't we have 6,000 chefs? Why isn't it 600,000 chefs? What we need to look at, what is stopping us accelerate the great food transformation culturally? And I think that has to be just done in different ways in different countries, in different regions. In the EAT-Lancet Commission, where I headed the policy work, people were surprised because we came up with very broad conclusions. But I said, look, there's no point of saying globally this has to happen. You must all eat the same diet forevermore, whether you live in Manitoba, Canada, or Berlin. The diets will be different, and they will be different according to the inheritance of cultures that people have. And the footprint of a low-carbon diet in Germany may be a very different quality, different conformation, different ingredients to what it is in Brazil or in India. That has to be worked out locally. So that's where the chefs become really important change agents. So I've given you a long answer, but my short answer is yes.
No, I really appreciate the answer. I love how you wrapped it up with how the chefs need to be such strong change agents to bring in that local element. So great answer. Thank you so much.
Okay. Tim, in your answer, you also mentioned the educational system. And one of the questions Friederike now asked is also regarding that. Friederike, do you want to pose the question yourself, or should I do it for you?
I can do it. I will not put on the video because I'm sick right now, so I will spare you that. But I just wanted to ask, what do you think of the food educational system? I know that you obviously teach food policy. I used to study at UNISG in Italy, but there's so few places where you can actually study food systems. And also the educational system for chef is very one-dimensional and is only focusing on actually the product. Do you think that this would be also a big driver for change, or do you think that's just like a small fraction? And how would a good educational system look like?
Sorry, Friederike. I'm sorry you're not well. Yes, I of course. I went back into education because I think education is important. The difficulty is very often, and my country does this, and it happens in Germany too, is you say, well, we'll work on 5-year-old children or 10-year-old, 15-year-old children. Too late, too late. Actually, we have to do that, of course. But actually, it's the mass of the population. We have to do public education, not just education in schools. So the education task is multi-level too. We have to be more clever about how we do it. I'm a university professor. This is elite work that I do. We do masters and PhD, no undergraduate at all. But, well, education isn't just what happens in universities and schools. Every parent is educating their child. I think we are not being creative enough yet about having babies as a change agent. It's a moment in life when women really think about nutrition, and it's a moment when we can get people to think about the environmental impact of food and the environmental impact of children, actually. But education is critical, of course, absolutely important. But I'm cautious, Friederike, about politicians who like to say, well, it's all about education. That means they don't have to do anything. They don't have to change laws. They don't have to set new directions. They don't need to think about money flows. We can't expect in Europe farmers to do the right thing and produce more plants if they're on a treadwheel of all the time having to work faster and faster to produce more to try and make a living, when in fact all the money is made off the land anyway. I will give you the figures for Britain. In Britain, £250 billion is spent on food. So 225 billion is spent on food and drink every year. It's a big amount of it. Farmers get about 5% of that. All the money goes elsewhere. Deliveroo, the delivery companies who get a food from a restaurant to a home are making more money than farming now. So if we don't deal with those political economy issues and just say, well, it's all about education, we're just putting ourselves into one little bit of the jigsaw. You know, jigsaws, making a pattern out of many parts. But I think education is very important, of course. It is very important. But I want it to be mass education, not just school education, when we come to the policy change.
Because, of course, educated people can also make educated and more conscious choices. And here, this would lead us to one of the next questions, two questions which I can combine into one. One is about the interplay of food policy and social policy. So in the last years, we could see that food and other goods we consume on an everyday basis have become cheaper and cheaper, while other things that are really important for us, like housing, childcare, also the education, have become more expensive. And if you look at food, we can see that especially unhealthy foods have become more affordable, while, as you also said with the example of the burger from cultured meat, that this sustainable food is often sold for a lot of money, which then also has this side development that a lot of people who might not have that money don't feel like they are worth, or that they they don't feel like they should be eating sustainable food, like it's nothing for them. So what's your take on the affordability of healthy and sustainable food? And do you think that cheap food has become the substitute for a good social policy of really making good food available for the masses?
I think this is actually the question that got me into food policy 45 years ago. The first bit of research I ever did personally, the second bit. The first bit with field work that I did was on food poverty in Britain under Mrs. Thatcher. So this is 1980, 81, 82. So it's 40 years ago. And it's back. In COVID-19, in this coronavirus crisis, in my country, the 5th or 6th richest country in the planet, 8 million people went without food in the crisis. 8 million people. And the government has recognized that. My colleagues and I, we wrote to the Prime Minister and said, you need to have some system where you're sure that everyone has access to affordable food and make sure that everyone gets a good, nutritious diet in this crisis. They ignored us, completely ignored us. So we wrote again and again and again. And what happened was eventually the government created a strategy process called the National Food Strategy. They suddenly said, oh, we're leaving the European Union. Oh my goodness, we must do something about food. Oh, what children. That's being rude about children. Children understood it. But the good thing is, the person who's leading that absolutely got it. And was, so from inside the government, a conservative criticizing the conservative government. So 8 million people out of 67 million people in Britain having bad diets and went without food in the crisis. Well, you can tell I get very angry about it. This is not a civilized food culture. Now, if you unpick that, people on low incomes get used to having to eat fatty, high sugary foods, they're filling. They know it's bad nutrition, but they do it. And we then see the health profile gets worse for people on low income. Obesity is worse on low income families in Britain than rich. There is a social gradient of obesity to thinness, which is actually the class system, income distribution. Now that's a cultural issue. If you suddenly doubled incomes, they just eat more. So you're back to Federica's question about education and culture and so on. But we know from studies, the study I did 40 years ago showed people on low incomes, they know what a healthy diet is, they just can't afford to eat it because they're paying huge amounts for the housing or for the telephone or for the TV. And you can say, well, why aren't they making food the most important thing? Well, do you want to not have a TV, not have a telephone? That's the sort of thing rich people say about poor people. So this is a very delicate cultural values complexity on itself. So it's a great question, and it's a very delicate issue. I sometimes tell a story. I'll make this my last point. In the first woman MP in Britain was a woman called Nancy Astor, married to a billionaire in modern terms, the Americans, the Astor family. They came to live in Britain. And she went campaigning to be elected. And she said, when this question was asked of her, this is 100 years ago, she said, but the poor people can make good, nutritious soup out of fish heads. And then she used to say this in all her speeches until one day someone said, but who eats the fish? You're telling me I have to eat the head of the fish. You're eating the fish. This is social justice in food. That's why the social justice movement about food has to work alongside the environmental movement because of what you asked. The social and the food policy and the economics and the culture all go together. And my country's, I'm criticizing my country. It's the same in Germany too, in part. Not as bad as Britain, but it's not good either. The social gradient in Germany is not good. So it's a great question, and it's very delicate. Very delicate. It's a very complex issue. No one likes to be told what to eat. Everyone thinks they choose their diet. They don't. They choose it from their family, from their history, from their religion, from their gender, from, at certain ages, what the rock star says. These cultural factors are very important for us to understand and to make also part of how we think. Great question.
Yes, I agree. And I realize that the time is already very advanced, but I would like to ask one last question before we say goodbye. So I would like to know, or I would like to ask a question and leave the people with a bit more tangible information after all this really complex input. So what would you say, how can we as consumers and also food professionals, which a lot of the people at the Gemeinschaft are, how can we get involved in food politics?
That's a classic last question that is so enormous we now need 2 days. Well, the answer is to do what you're doing. I always say, just get going. I didn't know what to do and I just got going. I went and met people and we started a discussion group in 1975, and I'm still friends with all of those people. Some have died, but most haven't. We just started, some were biologists, I was a social scientist, someone else was a soil scientist, someone else was a nutritionist, someone else was a development specialist, someone else was interested in what we now call fair trade. You know, we will just started talking and started thinking we have to do something. Why are we talking about out there? Why aren't they? So you're doing it. But back to the previous question, I probably didn't say it clearly enough. What follows from the delicacy of this social values and low income and affordability, as you said, is that, well, we know what is a good diet for health. We now know what a sustainable diet looks like. It's got to be low carbon, low embedded water. You know, we can work it out. And it's why people like me have been calling for Europe, for Germany, for Britain, for my country, for my city. I'm on the London Food Board advising the Mayor of London. We need sustainable dietary guidelines. So what is a sustainable diet in Bavaria? What is a sustainable diet in Berlin? It then needs to be costed. And you say, is this affordable? If not, the income, it should be a part of thinking about income. Welfare systems. So for me, a sustainable dietary guidelines is one of the most important things we should now be campaigning for. The UN has a system of encouraging governments to have nutrition, food-based dietary guidelines, it's called. We need to have sustainable diet guidelines. One of the things I'm pushing for the UN Food Systems Conference to aim for is to have an encouragement for every country on the planet to have sustainable dietary guidelines, which then can be costed. They will be different in Malawi to Germany, very different in Britain to Brazil. But unless we recognize that a good diet is one which is environmentally okay, socially okay, affordable, good values, and people like it, well, how can we expect farming to produce what we want? So what can we do? I think what you're doing in the Gemeinschaft is good. But do you have any clear goals for what you want, not just of the German government, of your state governments, but what you want the European Union to be doing? And for me, sustainable dietary guidelines is something that one can aim for all the levels, at the global level, at the national level, the continental level, European now, or down to our city or our town. And in London, on the London Food Board, I have now agreement that we will be working on sustainable dietary guidelines for London. But do that in a way that Bristol can do and Berlin can do. So for me, I'm answering your question about what can you do, and I'm saying, well, this is me trying to answer and saying, look, here's where I am now, this is what I think we need to be doing. In my book, Feeding Britain, I have many ideas. The last fifth of the book, very big section. It was read by reviewers and they said, Tim, you must say, here's Britain in a crisis. You must say what you think needs to be done. So I do. And that's one of them. Unless we have sustainable dietary guidelines, we cannot expect. I'm looking now across a field here. What is it doing? It would be better to be under wood than just producing more sheep. It would be better to be for wildlife than that. But some of that field could be growing horticulture and the rest wood. Unless we know what sustainable dietary guidelines are, we don't understand land use. But for me, it's all in that slide. Get engaged wherever you are. Chefs, they're really interested in quality. That's why I like working with chefs. They really think about quality. We've got to be thinking a lot about quality and culture, quality and social values. On my circular diagram, the right to the top. So a really good question to end. But whatever you do, my grandmother always said, if you don't know what to do, do something. And
it's really good to hear from. It's really good to hear from you, who's been in or working in the field for so long. To hear from you that we are on the right track here. And again, you saying that collaboration is so important, that working with chefs is so important, that putting quality in the field of focus is so important, is really, is really motivating to us as a group of people. And yeah, it just shows us that.
I think, Daniel, if I can interrupt, I think one other thing I should have said is short supply lines. One of the great things that chefs can do is shorten their supply lines. Why are we having soya into Europe from Brazil? This is crazy. Absolutely crazy. I think we need to be thinking, and one of the joys of thinking about sustainable diets is that doesn't mean to say only eating local. It's actually sometimes better to have it's a lower carbon footprint if you have it from further away than you trying to grow it here. So, it's not a, remember my slide on food nationalism. Food nationalism isn't necessarily the answer.
Regarding that, I really like, yes, I really like the essay, The Local Trap, which is all about how and where local food actually makes sense. I can recommend it to anyone who's interested in that topic. Yeah.
So look, very good. I too need to go. And it's later for you. You're 1 hour ahead of me. Look, I give you very good wishes and thank you for asking me. I always say to my students, you're the future, I'm the past. But I also say to you all fondly what I say to all my students: work harder.
We will. So thank you so much.
Throw things at me as I leave.
If you only knew how hard we're already working.
Yeah,
but we're doing our best. We're doing our best.
Yeah,
so
very good.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. Just to all the participants and listeners, I just want to say that the next date for Das Symposium will be the 21st of September, where David Zilber, who was the head chef of the fermentation lab at Noma for many years, will talk about the future of culinary training. He's a very knowledgeable guy as well, has a lot to share, and very charismatic. So I'm already looking forward a lot to that talk. As always, you can find the recordings of the talks on the app. And if you would like to connect with the other participants of Das Symposium, you can do that via our digital Stammtisch. All the information on how to register you find in the onboarding email that you got when you registered for Das Symposium 2020. So thank you all so much for coming tonight to this talk of Tim Lang, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, you can also share them on the Stammtisch site. And as Federico also already posted in the chat, a reading list of materials that were mentioned in this talk will be shared afterwards. So thank you a lot, and I wish everyone a nice evening. Goodbye.